He found black mold hidden for over a year and his wife knew the whole time. Now their baby can't visit. His wife knew about the black mold for over a year. She looked right at it, made direct eye contact with the person who found it, and said absolutely nothing. Not a word. Not a whisper. Not even a vague hint that she might want to bring something up later. And the whole time, their 13-month-old baby was being taken to that house. That is the part that stops you cold. Because this is not a story about a messy house or a difficult mother-in-law or the ordinary friction of blended family visits. This is a story about a parent who made a deliberate, repeated, sustained choice to protect her mother's feelings over her own child's lungs. That distinction matters. It matters a lot. Let us go back to the beginning so you can understand just how far this goes. When the baby was first born, this dad had concerns right away. The house had been smoked in for years, the kind of deep, embedded smoke that lives in the walls and the carpets and the curtains long after the cigarettes are gone. There were spider webs covering the ceilings. There was dust so thick and so settled that his sister, an actual professional cleaner with years of experience, laughed out loud when she first walked through the door. Not a polite chuckle either. Not the kind of sound you make when you are being diplomatic. The kind of laugh that only escapes a person when something is so genuinely shocking that your body just responds before your manners can catch up. He cared enough about his newborn child that he paid out of his own pocket to have his sister come and do a proper clean of the main areas of the house. He did not demand anything dramatic. He did not issue threats or ultimatums or make the whole thing a confrontation. He just wanted it to be safe enough for a baby. That was the whole ask. During that cleaning, his sister opened the cabinet underneath the kitchen sink. What she found was not a little mildew. It was not some minor water damage that you could wipe away with bleach and a cloth and a bit of elbow grease. The cabinet was, in her professional words, entirely full of black mold. Not a patch. Not a corner. Not some spots that had been growing and could be managed. Entirely full. She told him straight away that she was confident it could not simply be cleaned. It needed to be physically removed and the source of the moisture had to be addressed or it would come right back. That is not a minor issue you can pretend does not exist. That is a documented health hazard. That is the kind of problem that causes respiratory issues in adults and is genuinely dangerous for infants whose immune systems are still forming and whose airways are still small and vulnerable. A crawling baby at floor level, breathing in air that circulates through a mold-filled cabinet, is not in an acceptable environment. That is not an opinion. That is basic science. And here is the part that makes your stomach drop. When his sister made that discovery and opened that cabinet door, both she and his wife were standing right there in that kitchen. They made direct eye contact over the open cabinet. They both saw exactly what was inside. They both knew in that moment what it meant. And then his wife went home with him that evening and said nothing. Not that day. Not the next week. Not during any of the many visits that followed over the next 13 months. She kept it to herself, silently, while their baby continued to be brought back to that house again and again. Think about what that actually means for a second. This man trusted his wife completely to be honest with him about anything that affected their child's safety. He had already demonstrated that he took this seriously. He had already expressed his concerns clearly. He had already put conditions in place before visits. He had already spent his own money trying to make the situation better. He was operating in good faith, doing everything he could think of to protect his son, and while all of that was happening his wife was sitting on information that changed everything. She had been there. She had seen it with her own eyes. And she chose silence. Every single visit after that moment happened without him having the full picture of what he was walking his child into. And she knew. Now let us talk about where things stand 13 months later. The bedroom that his wife's mother refused to let his sister clean during that original visit is still not clean. Nobody went back to address it. Nobody insisted. The main areas of the house that were cleaned have already returned to the same state they were in before his sister ever showed up. All that work, all that money, and the household just quietly slid right back into the same patterns, the same layers of dust and neglect, as if nothing had changed at all. And now he has finally been told about the mold cabinet. Not by his wife. By his sister. That night he sat down with his wife and told her clearly, and apparently very calmly given the circumstances, that he did not want their son going to that house until the mold situation was resolved. He was not yelling. He was not accusing. He was not making it personal. That is a completely reasonable thing to say. That is not an ultimatum designed to punish anyone or start a war. That is a parent doing the most basic possible thing a parent can do, which is look at a known, documented, confirmed health risk and say not around my child. That is the job. His wife's response was that they could not replace the cabinet because they did not have the money. Now here is where it starts to feel almost insulting. He knows, because he lives in the same reality with access to the same information his wife has, that her family recently remodeled part of the kitchen. They bought a brand new refrigerator. They signed a loan for a brand new 2026 vehicle straight off the dealership lot. So the claim is not that there is no money. The claim is that the money they do have is being directed toward everything except the one thing that would make their grandchild's environment safe to breathe in. That priority list is worth sitting with. New car, yes. New refrigerator, yes. Kitchen remodel, yes. Removing a cabinet full of black mold from a house where a baby visits regularly, no. That tells you everything you need to know about where this family's priorities actually land, and it tells you something uncomfortable about why his wife might have found it easier to stay quiet for 13 months rather than push her mother to deal with this. What makes this even more layered and more painful is the way his wife is now treating him in the aftermath of this conversation. She is being short with him. She is pulling back. She is acting as though he has done something wrong by raising this concern, as though he is the difficult one in this situation, as though the problem is his reaction rather than the thing he is reacting to. She is making him feel like the problem when the actual problem is a cabinet that a professional cleaner described as beyond salvageable sitting inside the home where their infant child spends time. Ask yourself what you would genuinely do if you were in his position. If you found out your partner had known about a serious health hazard in the place your child visits, had known about it for over a year, had been physically present when it was discovered, had made eye contact with the person who found it, and then had actively chosen not to tell you, not once in 13 months, and then responded to your completely reasonable safety concern by acting cold and annoyed at you, how would you feel? Because the word betrayal is not too strong here. This is not about the mold being an awkward topic. This is not about forgetting or not realizing it was important. This is about a choice she made, and kept making, every single time she had an opportunity to say something and did not. He did not blow up. He did not forbid his wife from seeing her mother. He did not demand the entire house be torn apart or renovated top to bottom. He set one specific, measurable, health-related condition. Fix the mold cabinet and we can talk about visits resuming. That is an extraordinarily restrained response given everything he now knows and everything he has been sitting with since that conversation. I also want to address the idea that some people might push back with, which is that maybe he is overreacting about mold. He is not. Black mold, particularly when it fills an entire cabinet to the degree his professional cleaner sister described, releases spores into the surrounding air. Those spores are not harmless background noise. For a crawling, floor level, puts everything in his mouth 13-month-old, the risk is real and it is documented. This is not paranoia. This is pediatric common sense that any pediatrician would back up without hesitation. The smoking history of the house adds another layer on top of all of this. A home that has been smoked in for years already has compromised air quality by default. It is also more likely to have developed secondary moisture and mold problems in multiple areas, not just the one that was found. The cabinet might not even be the only issue. It might simply be the one they happened to open. Now here is what I really want you to think about. His wife is not acting defensive because she knows she was right. She is acting defensive because somewhere inside she knows that she made a choice she cannot fully justify out loud. Keeping that information from him was not an accident. It was not an oversight. She was there in that kitchen. She saw it. She made eye contact with the person pointing at it. And then she went home and said nothing. For 13 months. That is not a moment of forgetting. That is a sustained, repeated, daily choice to withhold information from her husband about their child's well-being. Every single morning she woke up and did not say anything. I genuinely cannot think of a fully charitable interpretation of that decision. The most generous reading is that she was afraid of conflict with her mother, afraid of what it would mean if her husband put his foot down, and so she kept putting off the conversation until so much time had passed that bringing it up felt impossible. But even that version does not let her off the hook. Because every month that passed was another month her husband was making parenting decisions without knowing something he had every right to know. The least charitable reading is that she understood exactly what telling him would result in, which is precisely what happened, which is him saying the baby should not go back until this is fixed. And she wanted to avoid that outcome badly enough that she stayed quiet for over a year to prevent it. If that is what happened, she prioritized her mother's uninterrupted access to the baby over her husband's ability to make informed choices about their child's health. That is not a small disagreement about in-laws or family dynamics. That is a fracture in the foundation of how they are supposed to operate together as co-parents who trust each other. He is not the problem here. Not even close. He is the only person in this entire situation who has consistently acted in the direct interest of the child from the very beginning. He paid for cleaning. He set clear expectations early. He waited over a year and checked in on whether those expectations were being met. And when he finally found out the truth, he responded with a calm, specific, reasonable boundary rather than a blow-up. The verdict here is not complicated. He is completely justified in saying that baby does not go back until the mold is gone. Full stop. And the bigger conversation he and his wife need to have is not about the cabinet. It is about why she thought it was acceptable to hide something like that from him for 13 months, and what that says about how she views their partnership when it comes to their own child's safety. That conversation is long overdue, and she is the one who owes him answers. She refused to host 25 people on Mother's Day, and now the whole family is attacking her. She babysat every single child at that party, ran herself ragged keeping the kids entertained the entire afternoon, and somehow she is still the villain of Mother's Day. That is the summary right there. That is the whole absurd situation in one sentence. Let us set the scene because the details here matter. She and her husband are in their 20s, no kids yet, living in a modest starter home she bought before they were even married. She likes to host. She is happy to do it. But she hosts on her terms, small gatherings, 8 to 10 people, people she actually enjoys being around, people who fill a room with warmth instead of tension. She has built her home into something that reflects her personality and her comfort level, and that matters. That context matters because what she was being asked to do was not a small thing. The ask from her husband's family was to host over 25 people for Mother's Day. 25 people, in a starter home, that she bought to suit her own lifestyle, not to function as an event venue for a family that large. Think about what that actually looks like in practice. The parking alone would be a nightmare. The kitchen would be overwhelmed. Every corner of the space she has carefully made her own would be occupied by people filing in and out, filling plates, corralling kids, and taking over a home that was never designed for that kind of scale. And it was not just the logistics that made this difficult. 2 of her husband's sisters have a genuinely hostile history with her. We are not talking about awkward tension or someone who gives a little side eye at family events. These are adult women who ignored her completely at the housewarming she hosted in her own home. They walked through her door, ate her food, breathed her air, and still could not extend her the basic courtesy of acknowledgement. They gossiped about her at that same event, whispering in corners of the home she had opened to them in good faith. And then, as if that were not enough, they scratched her face out of photographs at their father's house. That is not passive-aggressive. That is deliberate. That is someone taking a physical object, picking up something sharp, and erasing you from a family moment. Not ignoring you. Not cropping you out digitally from a distance. Physically, manually, with intention, removing your face from a photograph as though you never existed. That image has stayed in my head since I read it. I need to pause here, because the photo thing genuinely floored me. Grown women. Scratching out a face in a photograph. Like something out of a horror movie. So she is being asked to celebrate Mother's Day, which she cannot personally claim since she does not have children yet, by hosting 25+ people in her home, including at least one woman who has been openly hostile to her and literally defaced images of her face. And she is supposed to just be fine with that. She is supposed to smile and cook and clean and play hostess to people who have made it very clear they do not respect her, who have looked her in the eyes at family gatherings and chosen cruelty anyway. She is supposed to swing open the door of her safe space and welcome in people who have treated her like she is nothing, and do it with grace, and do it cheerfully, and do it for an entire afternoon. She and her husband declined. They did it respectfully. Their reasoning was simple and completely logical. She could not simultaneously celebrate her own mother and host a party of that scale in the same day. That is not an excuse. That is a real constraint that any reasonable person would understand. You cannot be two places at once. You cannot pour that much energy into managing a large family gathering and also be present and emotionally available for your own mother on a day that is specifically meant to honor her. One of her husband's other siblings also has a house. That sibling was not asked to host. No one showed up at that door with a guest list and an expectation. The celebration ended up at his parents' house, which is where it always happens anyway, where most of the siblings already live, and where the family is clearly comfortable holding events. Nothing was lost. The day happened. People gathered. Food was eaten. And yet, what happened next is the part that reveals the actual dynamic at play here. She and her husband were criticized at the celebration. Not gently pulled aside for a quiet conversation. Not approached with curiosity or genuine concern. Criticized, in the open, in front of people, at an event she showed up to anyway despite having every reason to stay home. His mother ended up having to host and cook, and rather than that being treated as a shared family responsibility, something everyone could have pitched in on together, it was treated as a burden that she and her husband had unfairly created by declining. Think about what is embedded in that logic. The assumption is that it was her job to take on the hosting burden, and by not doing so, she created a problem. But no one was asking why the fathers in the family were not stepping up. No one was directing that same criticism at any of the men who also could have organized, contributed, or handled logistics. It landed on her. It always lands on her. And then she spent the entire party babysitting. Every child there. She was not sitting in a lawn chair with a plate of food, checked out and coasting through the afternoon. She was running. She was engaging. She was using her voice and her energy and her physical presence to keep nieces and nephews occupied and entertained the entire time, specifically so the mothers in that family could sit down, exhale, and actually enjoy the day that was supposed to be theirs. She understood the assignment. She showed up and she executed it completely. She gave her whole afternoon over to those kids without being asked, without fanfare, without expecting a thank you. That is the thing she was literally there to do. Give mothers a rest. And she did it. Let that sink in. She gave up her own afternoon, physically chased children around, freed up the mothers to actually enjoy their day, and still got told she fell short because the kids might have preferred her living room. The bar is not just moving. The bar is on a different planet. There is also something worth naming here about what Mother's Day actually is. She is not a mother. She explicitly says they do not have children yet. Mother's Day is not her celebration to host or manage. She participated, she contributed meaningfully, and she honored the day by giving up her time to care for the children who were already there. She did not owe that family a venue. She did not owe them a catered party. And she certainly did not owe them the experience of hosting women who have been openly cruel to her inside her own home, which is supposed to be her safe space. I want to address the family logic one more time because it is genuinely baffling. The argument seems to be that because she has a house and is willing to host sometimes, she is obligated to host whenever the family decides it would be convenient. But that is not how hospitality works. Hospitality is a choice, not a duty. And that choice becomes even more complicated when the people you are hosting have demonstrated that they will use your home as a venue to disrespect you. She is not being selfish by protecting her home environment from people who have already shown her who they are. She is being sane. She is doing the thing that any person with a healthy sense of self-worth would do when faced with the same situation. The verdict here is clear and I am not going to soften it. She did nothing wrong. Not a single thing. She declined an unreasonable request politely, participated fully in the celebration that did happen, gave her labor freely to make the day easier for the mothers in the family, and still walked away being treated like she had failed everyone. The family, particularly the sisters who have treated her this way, do not deserve the hospitality they are demanding. You do not get to scratch someone's face out of a photograph and then expect that same person to open their home to you and serve you food and host your children. That is not how basic human decency works. She protected herself, she supported her husband, and she showed up anyway. That is more than enough. Drop a comment and let me know which story hit harder for you. And if you made it this far, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot.